Right, I wouldn't normally read a red top newspaper article because generally they're shite, and this is a good example of shite, because the reality is there's something else going on in the news right now and they're not talking about us, so instead we get this article instead. Nothing useful, but I'm going to use this to make a really interesting, good, valid point. This is called a true or a valid equivalence. Okay, so we've all heard of a false equivalence. This is a true and a valid equivalence. So you're going to have to read it whilst I speak it, because I'm going to transpose this into the equivalence, but read on screen so that you can see what I'm getting at. It reads, Mum left in stitches at husband's blunder after going onto the internet claiming gravity to be a force. Pauline Tremble says her husband Andy went onto the internet correcting a load of flat earthers on gravity being a force as per Newtonian gravitation, but failed to notice that when he checked it up, he was incorrect. A mum says that she didn't have the heart to point out to her husband's mistake when he proudly got onto the internet and started correcting a load of flat earthers with gravity being a force. Pauline Tremble and her husband Andy had purchased a computer, and then Andy was influenced by some dumbass on the internet trying to control the narrative, and he felt obligated to go online and correct a load of flat earthers that gravity was in fact a force. But it wasn't until Pauline had checked it herself on her cell phone and looked it up and found everywhere on Google that everyone in current physics understands gravity to be an effect, and it cannot act on matter because it isn't, like George Musser says, nothing is reaching out. The mum says that she was left in stitches by his failure to notice the current position in science had changed, and Pauline fearing somebody would be deceived by her husband's nonsense on the internet. This is the husband basically fitting the green carpet on his lawn thinking it's astroturf. It is essentially a perfect equivalence for ball earther idiots that come onto the internet and pretend that gravity is a force. You are essentially laying a beautiful green carpet on your lawn and thinking you've got astroturf. Gravity is not a force, it does not act on matter, and it does not explain anything in the current model that you guys believe and worship, does it? No. The 54-year-old Burke said, oh no, this is the wife. The 54-year-old normal person said, I didn't have the heart to tell him that gravity wasn't a force anymore. He was so pleased with himself for correcting all the flat earthers. I just couldn't tell him. He said, gravity is a force. Everybody told me in school that gravity was a force. These flat earthers are morons. It's listed as a force in the national curriculum, and that's what I got taught. He didn't realise that it was not a force, and that it has changed since he was taught that nonsense in school, and he didn't get taught the nonsense that's currently thought of in science because he didn't go to university and engage with an undergraduate course where he would have learned that gravity is not a force, it's an effect. He thought that he knew better because he went to high school and it was taught to him in the national curriculum. Pauline said Andy is now joking that he plans to transform into a flat earther and test his new theory or his newfound education that gravity is not a force, just to see how wrong he really was. And I think, oh, there we go. Pauline said that her husband loves to engage with the dumb flat earthers, but he probably didn't realise that his position was wrong when he honestly started to argue it. But even when he did realise it was wrong, he carried on doing it because he's such a pudding. Sharing the hilarious mix-up on Facebook, Pauline wrote, when your husband tells flat earthers that gravity is a force and then realises that when he looks it up everywhere in current physics tells him it's not, he feels like a bit of a wally. Sorry friends on the internet, but feel free to come over and throw rotten tomatoes at my husband for thinking that gravity is a force. I think that's it now. Yeah, that's the last of it. So my point is that for those ball earthers that tell you that gravity is a force or whatever, just because they say it acts like a force and that it can be treated as a force, if it isn't acting on matter, it isn't a force just because you calculate it as one. Calculation is not causation. Don't be an idiot like this guy, accidentally fitting green carpet to your front lawn thinking it was astroturf. That's the same as arguing that gravity's a force when we all know it isn't a force, is it? It's just an effect. Thanks, Einstein.